my bookhos. Continuing my Brambly Hedge themed year of little projects, I decided that I had to make a little plushy mouse. Not only because of the mice at Brambly Hedge, but also like, look how cute. Look how cute and tiny. And I thought it would make a great little like toy for my in-laws cat. And I still need to make one, so that's bad on me. Sorry, Kim. Anyway, so when I start looking for a craft pattern or something, I definitely just Google it, right? Like most of us just search for it. Luckily, I found a free pattern that was in the public domain because it was from a Victorian magazine. Obviously, I couldn't resist it, but I also try to be really considerate about the sources that I'm taking stuff from, right? We should all be considerate about the sources that we're using information from, right? Honestly, the whole backstory for this little mouse pattern in terms of like the magazine itself could be its own video, but I also don't think it's really helpful to separate these two into different things. I want to keep them in one so that if people come for the craft, they also have all the educational material. So we're going to get into the history and then we're going to get into a craft time. But first, I really hope that you do stick around for the history because it's really important. Anyway, let's get into it. Welcome to Bookhoarding by Bianca. I'm Bianca. And today we're going to take a little meander into something that I think we've all seen across our timelines on social media. Whether on Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, or wherever, I think we've all seen these screen grabs on all our crafty networks and in searches when we've been looking for Victorian things. And I see those articles and these things shared all the time, but there's no context. And I decided that I wanted some context to what I was getting this free stuff from. And there's nothing wrong with using free resources. I want us to know. I just want to be really considerate and do the research to figure out what is going on here. Because if I am going to take the time to meander and look up a pattern and print it and grade it and do all these things and then deliver it to you, because yes, this will end in a free pattern for you, I also should take the time to also figure out where this came from. Filled with patterns, instructions, and needlework, and fashion plates, it's no wonder that these Victorian magazines are really, really popular in historical costuming and enthusiasm spaces. But as I was doing this research, I found that like the magazines were much more than just free patterns. There was articles, there was news and writing and all these things that we should be talking about. And that was the other thing. As much as I see these patterns and these screen caps being shared everywhere, I wasn't hearing anything about the sources they were coming from. So today's video is not going to be an all-encompassing video of every single one of these magazines. Instead, it's going to be on the most popular one, the one that I see taken out of context where we don't learn anything about it. It's just like, look at these pretty photos or screen caps or scans. And it's Godey's Ladies Magazine. Technically, it's Godey's Ladies Book and Magazine. So what is Godey's? When I started my journey into researching Godey's, there were two things that really stuck out to me. One was the context of magazines and how that specific thing became a magazine that became popular and lasted a while. And the other was about Sarah Josepha Hale, the literary editor. And because Godey's spanned most of the 1800s, we will be talking about suffrage and the Civil War here, so just an FYI. In 1830, Louis Godey started the Ladies Book. So before we get into Godey's itself, I think that we should talk about ladies magazines or magazines in general, which really started becoming a thing in the late 1700s with major booms and busts, but really hit a stride around the time that he started his. Between 1825 and 1850, a lot of things came together to really change the climate and appealability, I guess, of the contents of these magazines. Making the content more reliable made these much more enticing to subscribe to, which helped magazines stay in business. And I also just want to like stop here because I want you to remember that Snappy Dragon has a very important video comparing similar magazines to current magazines. And this is right up there with that. Like, it's the same conversation. I'm just digging into the weeds in one specific magazine for one specific pattern research that I was doing. But like, think of it contextually and critically in the way that Snappy Dragon presents it, which is if you know our modern magazines have ads, have different motives for what they're trying to sell you, for some lifestyle or for commercial products or for capitalism as a whole to just sell you on things so they can make money, these were really not that different. So it really shouldn't be shocking to folks that these things are going to have some implications behind them. I think most of us would know if something's named after a person, surely looking into the research about that person would be the minimal that we do, right? Minimal that we do? Minimal that we do. back to magazines. So important industrial technical changes were happening that made it more reliable to shift from just textual descriptions of fashions and into fashion illustration, or pictorials, as some of the research I was looking at called them. There's so much to talk about in this space, and I really am personally trying to keep it together and minimized because there's just a fascinating study of media at this time and all the things that were coming together in terms of American patriotism, because there was a really big push to try to be patriotic and nationalistic, and also at the same time denying European luxuries, while kind of also reinforcing the same hierarchies internally through fashion. So before we get to Godey's, a couple things. The issues that I'm going to talk about with Godey's is not going to be very different from other magazines. Snappy Dragon again talks about the issues of how these reinforce classism, racism, sexism, all of these isms. Again, not unlike some magazines today, let's be real. Another fun thing for Jane Austen fans is, if you remember Northern Abbey, there's a big meta conversations about novels and women reading novels. You'll remember that the mansplainer, Mr. Thorpe, does not want to kind of, have ladies in his life reading novels. He thinks they're stupid, despite him also having read them and liking them, because, he doesn't know what the he's talking about. In my research, I realized that magazines were one of the places where that commentary was happening. So we know that Jane was reading this stuff and would have known about this commentary to even talk about it in Northanger Abbey. A lot of these magazines were using that space to guide young women into a certain basic morality and lifestyle in a way that, basically the privileged editors wanted to carve women into as far as their education, because there wasn't a formalized education for women. And magazines would have been one of these places where you would have had that for the young women in the household, and it could kind of supplement that. And so much of the literary criticism at the time is about just on the things that are popular with young women, which again is not uncommon today. I see all you shit on persuasion. There are so many troubling quotes about weak education and tender sensibilities around women. I'm not gonna get into, but it's all there. We have written evidence that this was the idea, that they wanted to put this idea of what women should be in their gentle minds through suggesting better reading, aka not novels. So this is going to be a lot of me warning you that when you are looking at these sources, keep in mind that it's not just going to be a free pattern, that within those pages there might be some really loaded things that you are not seeing if you're just clicking on the free pattern things that don't take you to all the context. And with that, we know that fashion illustrations are therefore going to be entrenched with the biases that come with all the direction around it, right? And especially at this time where there's trying to be this push for nationalism and patriotism and making of their own kind of American fashions. Those are just reinforcing the racism and misogyny that we know existed at the time. A lot of things I'm going to talk about today too are going to really reinforce that even the plates themselves should be taken with a grain of salt in terms of this is the one and only way people dress at the time. Because we know A, it wasn't, and B, this was for a certain class of women. This was also very inspired by other things. These were not actually always what people were wearing. It was editors trying to, much like today, dictate what people were wearing. I want to add too, and I think this is really, really important, and I don't think that historical fashion folks should dismiss this. Most of the historical researchers that I read their work from put cartoons in with the fashion plates and illustrations. They considered those the same in terms of these are pictorial representations and we need to interpret them that way, and because of that, what are they telling us? And because of that, because some of these are going to have cartoons that are very racist and ableist and so many other terrible things, you must take these with a grain of salt, if not heaping piles of speculation. Because these were promoting specific luxury lifestyles for a certain class of white women in America, while simultaneously targeting Black women and the poor. In some of the papers I read, they noted that the editors would sometimes just reuse European illustrations too, because they were already made and just copy them, and then they would change the names to sound American. There were also a lot of notes from the researchers I saw that talked about how when you do this, when Americans were taking things from European things, they were also removing a lot of the context that the European magazines and papers put alongside those illustrations. And sometimes they would be kind of critical of like certain royals and people that were high ranking wearing certain luxuries. So all that to say, be really critical about the things you're consuming and using for research around this, because sometimes it might have been just a copy of a European thing that then is taken out of context from the European magazine. Getting back to Godey, he also wanted to help influence women's education. There's a quote from one of the things that sounds very Mr. Collins to me, which is, he wanted to be the beacon light of refined taste, pure morals, and practical wisdom. And talking about Godeys, obviously, to keep up with competition at the time for magazines, you had to include fashion plates. And again, one of the papers I saw talked about how they reframed these European styles to be American. Like, one thing was Americanized to be Philadelphia style. I also really want to lay the foundation for, there was a lot of loadedness in these basically propaganda on how people should live their lives. That was umbrellaed under taste, which also reminds me a little bit like, you know, propriety and like all those things that we talk about in Jane Austen about like the proper way to act, aka the way that pleases certain jerks. Taste, in this case, and I think even today, is not just limited to the idea of consumption and luxury consumption or how you portray yourself in the way you style yourself. This is loaded in terms of morality, politics, identity. Taste is all under that. So when you read these things and you hear people talking about taste, you should also think of that in like a very skeptical way, because what does that really mean? Oh, it means a lot of bad things. Think of it as like Lady Catherine. Like if you read these things, think Lady Catherine's reading them to you. And these fashion plates were also presented to Americans as a way to like free yourself and like go to your, you know, dressmaker and get her to make you something that looks just like this. Look at the freedom you have through replicating a fashion plate that may or may not have been copied from European styles and therefore has been in thousands of households. It just so reminds me of like fashion campaigns now, right? That are so like, this is for you, be so unique. And it's like, you've made thousands of this thing and literally everyone's wearing them. So like today, these try to push this idea of like independent self-styling while simultaneously reinforcing problematic ideas of bodies and racism and sexism and ableism. And I think that's the interesting thing, right? Like we can call things aesthetics, but that doesn't really remove it from the context that it's related to, right? Fashion can simultaneously act as a way to express yourself and feel freedom, but also fashion can be used by bad people, by bigots, to have this symbolism of certain bad things. When you're looking at these fashion plates in these Victorian magazines, and all the pictorials, if you will, outside of just the plates themselves, remember that these are ideals. They excluded a lot of the population, period. No one should be saying that these plates exemplify everything that everyone would have been wearing at the time. Clothing was simultaneously used to express where you were in society and where you wanted to be, but also if you dressed outside of where you were, it could be used against you. And it's really clear to me reading some of this that there was this anxiety in American publishing places about not being European and trying to enforce this idea of taste that distanced America from Europe, but also in that same way just reframes the same problem. Along with the clothes themselves, just as they are, I can't express enough, and I talked about this in a previous video, the clothing themselves, the fabric that becomes very popular and in high demand at this time, is also tied to enslavement in America. Enslaved peoples were used to pick and cultivate the cotton that was then brought to the north to make into fabric at all those mills. So as these fashion plates were showing these fabrics, we also need to understand that those fabrics were coming from this context. Industrialization and increased demand for these textiles is directly going to be connected to the use of enslaved peoples. According to Linzy Brekke-Aloise from A Very Pretty Business, Fashion and Consumer Culture in Antebellum American Prints, quote, while early national Americans eagerly sought sources of information about style, they struggled with the national political implications of a commerce and a culture explicitly driven by fashion. I will include all of the links and all the reference material that I've been talking through today, because I think it's really important for folks to also check it out. And again, this is not saying that we have to just totally throw these away and never reference them. I'm just letting you know that much like you need to read today's media with a critical eye and understanding the reading between the lines of what they're trying to sell you on or force you into, or who they're trying to get you to vote for, I think it's really important that you understand that for historical things as well. So who was Sarah Hale? She came from another magazine before going to Godey's, and she was a literary editor known for her ability to recognize and uplift American writers. She's often credited with recognizing early promise in Poe and Hawthorne. I will say, from what I was reading, it seemed like she didn't actually want to use fashion plates to sell the magazine. But ultimately, it seemed like Godey and Hale decided that like this was a financial thing, despite their reluctance. I want to touch on a couple of things with Hale that are really important, I think. And again, this isn't to say we need to throw all of this in a fire and never look at it again. It's more, I think there's a lot of nuance, and I think it's really similar nuance to today. Hale was an abolitionist, but not a suffragist. Many other people have gone into deeper discussions and explanations of this, but the TLDR is, if you've seen like The Gilded Age on HBO, you know that there's this whole idea of like these wealthy women being able to control their husbands and all these financials and major alliances and the whole transit of America through their wiles at home, through their control and power at home. That was the idea behind a lot of women who didn't support suffrage at the time. They thought that like women's places were to control the men from the home. There's just like there's piles of problems with this. And not only because like any of that control was really limited to a very specific class of people already, but there's just major problems because of the lack of equity happening here. I think that's important to think about, because in modern communities, I feel like we all know people who are self-proclaimed feminists but don't actually believe in equity for all. I mean, look at how many TERFs are self-proclaimed feminists. If feminism is about getting equity for all, you can't be out here doing that. TERFs. So despite Hale being an abolitionist, Godey doesn't delve into abolition. Why? Money. That's right. Much like they went for fashion plates because it was a thing that would bring in consistent subscribers, aka money, they didn't want to alienate their Southern housewife subscribers that made up a fair bit of their subscribers. So they didn't want to offend them, so they just didn't say anything that might, you know, make them cancel their subscription. And like, honestly, again, that's not that different from like modern media places today, having worked at some that were also too scared to say anything because people might not support us. And it's like, I mean, if you want to keep letting people say problematic things, that's going to be on you ultimately, and history will remember it. I do not recommend many of the other videos on YouTube about Hale, because one of them, I don't even know how to say this, but basically they use the word canceled to explain why she wasn't talked about much, and I'm like, no. Because Sarah Hale's legacy is deeply entrenched in our country, even to today. We may not all know her name off the top of our heads, but we can understand that her editorial choices were very important to Godey's, and therefore important to all the things around what that impacted, from the style or the taste or the morals that were expressed in women's households that like have led down to today. People still love sharing that because it's free. It's in public domain, so that's getting shared all the time. Her legacy is that she's still getting people to look at her stuff, on top of the fact that she authored the nursery rhyme, Mary Had a Little Lamb. I'm just telling you, if every child in America has to learn something, you're not canceled. You're doing fine. She is also the reason that America celebrates Thanksgiving as a national holiday. So yeah, let's actually talk about this woman so we don't forget her legacy. She's not going to be forgotten. And personally, I think anyone who uses cancel or even woke at this point, you need to assess your life, because I don't trust you. If we can't hold people accountable for what they did, what are we even doing? Hale is complicated, as are many people from various points in history, as are people today. She didn't support suffrage, but she did really support higher education for women. She was an abolitionist, but she also was part of a magazine that didn't do anything to talk about abolition at the time. And she's also widely seen as the person most responsible for Thanksgiving becoming a national holiday, which was a thing that was only celebrated around the area I guess she was from. And we all know that Thanksgiving is a really messed up holiday that celebrates a really bad time in our history. It erases the reality of what was happening to Indigenous people. She's complicated, but I think acknowledging that she's complicated and keeping that history accountable to itself is important. Ignoring any of this is not going to bring us more context to history. I think, if anything, understanding and being aware when you go into this helps you understand when you're looking at these magazines what context you're reading this from. It makes us more deliberate and conscious, not only, I think, of the things that we're consuming today, but the things that we're looking at from the past, from times that we may not be aware of all the kind of like double meaning in words, double meaning in phrases, and also like the motives behind something, just because we weren't living, so we don't really know all those things because you weren't entrenched in those meanings, right? I hope this is helpful next time that you approach any of this stuff that you're looking at, and that you too take a couple of minutes just to do a basic search of the history of the magazine that you're referencing for your projects. And also, if you aren't doing it exactly 100% the way that it looks in the magazine, this is a reminder that people at the time didn't either. In fact, some readers even wrote to the magazine to let them know about the unrealistic expectations they were putting out into the world. One Godey's reader actually said that she didn't have any intention of replicating the entire plate, but instead used them to guide her needle and her good taste. Okay, with all of that said, let's get to today's project. So there are tons of these freebie patterns for these, because they're small, they don't take a lot of space on the page as they were printing, I assume. And pen wipers were just a thing that you would wipe your drippy pens on. If you've ever been like me, a total nerd, and using a quill pen, that you'll know that they can get a little bit leaky as you're using them. If you put them down, sometimes you'll look at your hands, they'll be everywhere. So shockingly, I do have a use for this, but I also wanted the little mousy mouse pattern. I have reworked the pattern, added seam allowance where needed. And lucky for you, the pattern is now on my website for free for you to use. And yes, I know that theoretically the base pattern is free from like public domain, but I added seam allowance, and it's also in a PDF that you can print at the right size for your computer. And also, you don't have to do the thing where you take out the background because it's all like a yellowed aged page. You're welcome. So you can download the PDF, and you can totally use this to make your own little pen wiper or a little mice for whatever you need them for. You can use it for your cat, you can use it as a present, you can use it for your Laudna cosplay, I don't care. And this pattern is made free by the support of my patrons. Yes, I have a Patreon, please check it out, and I also have a Ko-fi that you can leave me a tip at as a thank you for any work and research I do. Some tiers get early access to my patterns, I'm just saying. In terms of materials, I only use scraps for this. You're welcome, Scrap Monster! I used fleece. I'd say that you can use fleece or felt or whatever other little stuff you've got lying around the house that's not going to fray easily. You could probably get away with using like not fleece for the body if you wanted to, but in terms of like soaking up pens and stuff, you probably want to use darker inky colors so that it doesn't show as badly for the bottom part. If you don't have any fleece or felt, like, you can also check out Joann. Like, Joann Fabric always has stuff in the remnants bin because people are always buying these to make blankets with. You can also check out any other local fabric store, but not Hobby Lobby, because most places have fleece, flannel, felt, but not Hobby Lobby. Don't go there. And you don't need much. And besides that, you just need a needle and thread, some buttons. You might want some wax for the whiskers or a thicker thread for the whiskers. And you'll probably want like embroidery thread for the tail, and you can either braid it or you can do what I did, which was I used a tiny crochet hook and crocheted like the instructions said too. So with that and your little button eyes, let's get going on this tutorial. First of all, print and cut out the pattern that I have in my description, and then get all your little supplies ready and cut out your pieces. So you just need one body, and then you need 2 ears. And then you'll need a few layers of the felt, and that's really up to you. But there you go. That's pretty much all you'll need for now, along with needle and thread and scissors. So you're gonna sew along the little mouth part and a little bit of the front side, and you start gathering to make it kind of look like the front paw, arm area, shoulder area, if that makes sense. And then I just gathered the whole booty area and left that open. So you can see here, like, that's going to be where I turn it inside out. But I kind of strategically did bigger gathers to try to make it look a little bit like the hips and the tummy and like those curves that would be on something. So yeah, this is it, or right side out, I guess would be the right term. And then you add the little ears there. And I did use that little line that you see there, that I'm pointing to help guide myself in making
little, like a seam, I guess would be the right term, just like sew it down to make it kind of buckle there. And then you just sew those in to where they need to be. And you can sew like across the body if you need to, not just in place. And then I stuffed it. You can see here the little stuffing. And I think it's getting really cute. I think like once it comes together with the stuffing, it starts to actually look like a mouse. So then I added the little eyes, and I used buttons, but you can use whatever you have. And then I did sew up the belly, as you can see here. And you can see it's starting to look kind of like a little mouse. Added the whiskers, and you just like kind of knot it at each end as you go through. You can use wax thread. I just used heavier thread. And then you cut 3 or however many layers of felt that you want for the bottom part, for where it's going to sit on. And I did try to make like the first layer a little smaller than the layers on top of for the contrasting colors. And as you can see here, definitely mouse is a little bit uneven on bottom, so it's going to need a little help staying on. That's totally fine. And then I did just do a really basic chain stitch with my smallest crochet hook for the tail. And that was the last bit. And that was my pen wiper.
Who are you? You're a scrap project? First she takes me to the museum with all those other puppets, and now she's done a scrap project. Would you like to join a union? This video had everything. It had Scrap Monster. It had Victorian magazine. It had Brambly Hedge. It had a DIY and a free pattern. And if you're looking for all the sources I referenced in my research, I have them linked in the description and on my blog post. Again, thank you so much, patrons, for helping make this happen. Like, you are the whole reason that I have the ability to take the time to research this stuff and make this happen. The pattern is linked in my description. Please let me know if you do use it. I would love to see your little mice pen wipers. I also have a coffee. Check it out. You can leave me a tip. And with that, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to make it so.